New York City, a place that never sleeps, where the streets are always buzzing with life, filled with the sounds of traffic, conversations, and the distant hum of music pouring out from cafes. But for Samira, or simply Sam, the city's vibrancy feels like a distant memory. She's a cancer patient in the final stages of her illness, living out her remaining days in a hospice on the city's outskirts. Her world has shrunk to the four walls of her room and the comforting presence of her beloved cat, Frodo. Despite the relentless toll of her illness, Sam faces life with quiet acceptance, trying to find solace in small, everyday moments. One day her caregiver, Ruben, a kind-hearted man with a knack for persuading people, convinces her to take a trip into the heart of Manhattan. There's a puppet show happening, and he believes it's the perfect excuse to get her out of the hospice, if only for a few hours. Sam hesitates at first, but eventually she agrees. She gathers her things, Frodo safely tucked in his carrier, and boards a bus bound for the city that never fails to amaze her, even from behind glass windows. As the bus rumbles into the bustling city, Sam watches the familiar chaos unfold outside. Crowds hurrying across crosswalks, honking taxis, and neon signs flickering above the towering skyscrapers. For a moment she allows herself to enjoy it. But then, out of nowhere, the atmosphere shifts. The sky darkens, an unnatural shade of gray swallowing the cityscape. A low, thunderous rumble grows louder, and before anyone can react, fiery objects streak across the sky, falling fast, like meteorites crashing into buildings, streets, and everything in their path. Panic erupts. People scream, cars swerve, and chaos reigns supreme. Sam and Ruben, caught in the middle of it all, are forced to abandon their plans and seek shelter. But it isn't just falling debris they have to worry about. From the craters left behind by the impacts, monstrous creatures emerge, tall, skeletal beings with razor-sharp limbs and an eerie ability to detect even the slightest noise. As the creatures tear through the city, hunting down anything that makes a sound, survival becomes an urgent, desperate fight. Scrambling through the debris, Sam and Ruben manage to find refuge inside an abandoned puppet theater. A handful of other survivors have taken shelter there as well, and together they huddle in the dark, breathing in hushed gasps. Fear settles thick in the air. Through the broken windows, they can see the creatures prowling the streets outside, their grotesque heads twitching at the faintest noise. Hours pass in oppressive silence. Then, a glimmer of hope. A helicopter flies low overhead, broadcasting an emergency message instructing survivors to remain silent and stay hidden until rescue arrives. But hope is fleeting in a world like this. Suddenly, the theater's backup generator sputters to life, emitting a low, rhythmic hum. The survivors freeze in terror, but it's too late. The creatures outside hear the sound and descend upon the building in a frenzy. In the chaos that follows, Ruben, in a desperate attempt to shut off the generator, makes a fatal mistake. A misstep, a loud thud, and within moments the creatures are upon him. Sam watches in horror as her closest friend is dragged into the darkness, his screams stifled before they can fully escape his lips. She barely has time to grieve before realizing she has to move. With Frodo clutched tightly against her chest, Sam knows she can't stay in the theater. The city is no longer a place of safety. It's a place where sound equals death, and the only way to survive is to stay silent and keep moving. The silence inside the puppet theater is shattered by the horrifying realization that survival is fleeting. Sam stands frozen in shock, watching as Ruben is taken by the monstrous creatures lurking outside. His sacrifice is brutal and swift, a chilling reminder that in this new world, even the smallest mistake can be fatal. Sam knows she can't stay here any longer. The city is no longer a place to simply exist, but a battlefield where noise means death. Grief weighs heavy on her, but survival instinct kicks in. With Frodo nestled safely in his carrier, Sam slips out of the theater, moving through the darkened streets of New York with calculated precision. The city, once alive with energy, now lies in eerie stillness, punctuated only by distant screams and the occasional crash of collapsing buildings. Every step is a gamble, each breath taken with the utmost caution. As she weaves through the debris-strewn alleyways, Sam stumbles upon another survivor, Eric, a young law student from England who looks just as shaken as she feels. He's alone, clutching a torn map of the city, his eyes wide with fear. In an unspoken agreement, they decide to stick together. In a world where every sound is a death sentence, having someone to rely on, if only for a short while, seems like a necessity. Their destination? The Harlem River. Sam believes that if they can reach the riverbanks, they might find a way out. perhaps evacuation boats or a safe zone beyond the city's borders. Eric, desperate and willing to follow any semblance of a plan, nods and falls into step beside her. Together, they push forward through the hollowed-out remains of New York. Their journey is a delicate balance of caution and urgency. Every intersection they cross is a potential death trap, every overturned car a possible hiding spot. At one point, they find refuge in a crumbling church, its stained glass windows shattered, pews overturned, and candles still flickering from abandoned prayers. The two of them sit in silence, exhaustion settling in, but the respite is short-lived. Suddenly, a soft clang echoes through the church. Eric, fumbling with his bag, accidentally knocks over a metal candle holder. The sound, though faint, is enough. The creatures, always lurking nearby, are instantly alerted. Their grotesque bodies move with terrifying speed, closing in on the church. Sam's heart pounds in her chest as she gestures frantically for Eric to move. The two of them bolt through a side exit, barely escaping into the night as the creatures tear through the sacred space behind them. Panting and shaken, they find their way into the subway tunnels beneath the city, hoping the underground passages might provide some cover. The tunnels, however, present their own set of challenges. Water drips from the cracked ceilings, creating tiny ripples in the flooded pathways. The echoes of their cautious footsteps reverberate ominously through the darkness. Every sound they make feels magnified 100 times over. Navigating through the subterranean maze, they encounter more signs of destruction. Abandoned belongings, discarded shoes, and haunting remnants of those who didn't make it out in time. At one point, they come across a small group of survivors who are not as fortunate. Sam and Eric can only watch in silent horror as the creatures descend upon them, their razor-sharp limbs cutting through the dimly lit tunnel like ghosts of death. The weight of it all begins to take its toll on Sam. Her illness, which she has tried to push to the back of her mind, starts creeping up on her. Her steps become heavier, her breathing more labored. Eric notices but doesn't say a word. He knows that in this world there's no room for weakness, only survival. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, they emerge from the tunnels, the cool night air a brief relief against the suffocating terror of the underground. In the distance, the river glimmers under the moonlight, and beyond it, faint lights flicker, perhaps a sign of evacuation efforts. But the path to salvation is far from clear. Between them and the water stands a final obstacle, a maze of wreckage, crushed vehicles, and the ever-present danger of the creatures who roam the city in search of their next prey. Sam and Eric share a glance, unspoken determination passing between them. This is their last chance. They have to make it count. Emerging from the subway tunnels, Sam and Eric finally find themselves on the outskirts of the city, where the shimmering waters of the Harlem River offer a glimmer of hope. In the distance, they can see the faint outlines of boats moving slowly along the current, a silent beacon of salvation in an otherwise hopeless night. The journey has been exhausting, and Sam feels the weight of her failing body pressing down on her more than ever. But she knows there's no time to rest, not yet. Between them and the river lies an urban graveyard of destruction. Overturned cars, crumbling buildings, and the silent, lurking terror of the creatures that have turned the city into their hunting ground. Moving forward requires absolute silence and precision, and even the smallest sound could mean the end. Sam clutches Frodo tightly, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest, while Eric grips his map, scanning the debris for a clear path forward. Step by step, they navigate the obstacles in their way. A shattered fire hydrant leaks water onto the pavement, each drop echoing louder than it should in the dead silence of the city. Nearby, a billboard teeters dangerously, ready to collapse with the slightest disturbance. Every movement is calculated, every breath held. They are so close now, just a few blocks away from what could be their escape. But fate has other plans. As they inch closer to the river, Eric accidentally steps on a piece of broken glass. The sharp crack is deafening in the quiet of the night. Both Sam and Eric freeze, their eyes wide with terror. The creatures, lurking in the shadows nearby, snap to attention, their grotesque forms moving with frightening speed toward the source of the sound. Panic sets in. Eric grabs Sam's hand, urging her forward, but Sam knows what must be done. She's exhausted and she's slowing them down. She looks at Eric, a silent plea in her eyes. This is his chance to survive. Before he can argue, she shoves him forward, motioning for him to run. Frodo meows softly in protest, sensing something is wrong, but Sam gently sets him down in Eric's arms. With one last look at the young man she's come to trust, Sam turns back toward the oncoming danger. She spots an abandoned taxi nearby, its horn still barely functioning. Summoning the last of her strength, she hurls a piece of debris at the vehicle, and the blaring honk echoes through the streets, drawing the creatures away from Eric and Frodo. It's a sacrifice she's willing to make. Eric hesitates for only a moment before running toward the river, Frodo safely in his arms. Behind him, Sam watches as the creatures swarm the noise, their razor-sharp limbs tearing through the wreckage in search of her. She doesn't run. Instead, she takes a deep breath and pulls out an old cassette player from her bag. With trembling fingers, she presses play, allowing the soft melody of a long-forgotten song to fill the air. A faint smile crosses her lips as the creatures close in. She listens to the music, letting it carry her away to a time before all of this. A time when life was simpler, when the world wasn't ruled by silence and fear. And then darkness. From the river, Eric watches in heartbreak as the city consumes Sam. But thanks to her sacrifice, he and Frodo make it onto the evacuation boat just in time. The boat drifts away from the shoreline, the flickering lights of the destroyed city growing smaller in the distance. Eric holds Frodo tightly, a tear slipping down his cheek as he realizes the true cost of survival. As dawn breaks on the horizon, the reality of their escape sets in. The fight isn't over, not by a long shot. But for now they are alive, and Sam's sacrifice will not be forgotten. The silence of the city lingers behind them, a haunting reminder that even in the face of unimaginable terror, humanity's greatest strength lies in its willingness to protect others, no matter the cost. The end. A Quiet Place. Day One is more than just a survival horror story. It's a tale of sacrifice, resilience, and the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. It reminds us that sometimes, silence speaks louder than words, and in the quietest moments, true courage shines the brightest.